talking about bank failures, inflation, all of that other stuff. This guy made such a good point. I thought, holy smoke. I think there's something to what he's saying here. He's saying that COVID and the way they've sold COVID for making people fearful is exactly the way they're doing what they're doing with the inflation. It's the new COVID. And I don't think he's too far off. It's pretty wild. Here we go. It's a little loud. I'll normalize the volume as soon as I can. Here we go.
Hey there, Jeremy Powell. Jeremy Powell, you are the new Anthony Fauci. Inflation is the new COVID, and you guys are going for the bull again. Knock it off, guys, okay? Look, you're going to run out and get toilet paper again? Everybody is acting exactly as they were acting that weekend. What are you doing, okay? Inflation. Oh my God, inflation, the bank runs. The banks are going to go broke. You sound exactly like we did during COVID, freaking and tripping. Dramatizing everything. Get to work. Control what you can control. Get great at what you're great at. Notice, we don't know where inflation comes from. We don't know who created it. We don't know how it's created. What does that sound like to you? COVID. We don't know where it came from. We don't know who created it, and we don't actually know what it does. And then they start telling you what to do about it. Stand 6 feet away, put on a mask, take 15 days. Remember, we were going to shut the country down for 15 days. Same bullshit's happening right now. What can you do about it? What am I doing about it? Look, I shore up the things that I have and can control. I make sure I don't have liabilities out there I can't manage or handle. I check with where my money's at. And the third thing I do is this. I go to work and I get great at my work, at my job, at my income, at my relationships, at my business. Get great at what you do, because no matter what happens out there in the world with all this fucking craziness, you're left with you. Get great at you. Get great at business.
Yeah, man. And like, you live in your head. You're the only one who lives in your head. You have to be okay with what's happening, right? You have to be okay with you, right? So pretty good advice there. Bank runs and all the rest ultimately comes down to you. Senator Denise Batters talking about China and Chinese infiltration, and Justin Trudeau, and this construction worker hangs his head in shame as Justin Trudeau is talking nonsense. Currently, millions of Canadians relate to this worker in the yellow hard hat, and David Creighton's sharing this video. He says, this is a serious issue, says Trudeau, when asked why Katie Telford, his chief of staff, can't testify. Workers were so ashamed they hung their heads when forced to stand with Trudeau. The one worker hid his face behind his hard hat. And so that's the guy in yellow, orange and yellow hard hat here. Yesterday I showed you the AP, or whoever was running it, had only footage over Trudeau's one shoulder looking towards Lloyd. I hadn't seen this image of this angle of the shot before. And I thought it was pretty funny. So here it is. The funny part about this, and so Trudeau warning, the funny part about this is this guy spends more than half the speech with the hard hat. Like, he looks down to cover his face and head. So he's not, I don't know, in the shot. I'm not sure. Here we go.
Attempts by interference by China did not affect the outcome of the 2019 and 2021 elections. That's something Canadians can be absolutely reassured by. But Canadians want to know even further, okay, are we doing everything necessary? And are there processes to hold people to account if things aren't being done necessary, if partisan decisions are slipping into that? And finding the right person of unimpeachable integrity, completely committed and devoted to Canada, to be able to look at that, to ask all the questions of everyone involved necessary, and come out and say, yes, the elections and the integrity held, but these are the things that could and should be improved. And this is the process going forward, and this is why Canadians can be comforted that things are being done right. Or conversely say, no, there's a real problem, the whole system is broken, we need to fix it. This is someone who's going to be able to say these things that won't and shouldn't be interpreted in a partisan way, because this is a serious issue that will impact whichever party is in power.
So you'd think it'd be pretty open and shut. He'd be able to answer questions about it. You'd think, but you'd be wrong. You'd be wrong. Here's Kevin. He says, Telford knows. Gerald Butts knows Telford knows. Trudeau knows. Telford and Butts know Trudeau knows. Canadians want to know. This is a National Post article that says she knows all the secrets. Tories to force vote in House of Commons over to Katie Telford's testimony. So they're going to try and bypass the committee that's filibustering in order to get the filibuster blocked. Laurie Goldstein says it's a simple question. Were Trudeau and Telford warned about foreign interference prior to the 2019 and 2021 elections? And if they were, what steps did they take in response? Everything else is noise. And so it's very, very interesting that this guy says leaker first, then we'll see. So they want to go after the CSIS leaker and vilify him. Here's what Pierre Poilievre is saying at his speeches. This is what he's tweeted out. End Trudeau's cover-up, bring home democracy, call an open, public, independent inquiry. Now, I don't think asking a corrupt government or a compromised government or a potentially compromised government to investigate itself with a special rapporteur, a bullshit made-up position, is satisfactory. An independent public inquiry, I don't even think that's satisfactory. The government is corrupt or compromised or both. And in any of those situations, I don't trust them to come to a conclusion that would be satisfactory or honest. Look at the Rouleau Commission. And so with that as a recent history to point to, it's very interesting, the pushes for an independent inquiry. I don't know what else we're going to learn from an independent inquiry that we haven't learned from the CSIS leaker. I think we need to act on the information that we have, not inquire for more information. There's a responsibility to act. And the more that the Trudeau delays, the more guilty he looks to being fully in the know, complicit, who knows? Here is Pierre Poilievre.
I asked Justin Trudeau, how much money did the Liberal Party get from the communist government in Beijing? He won't answer. I asked him, how much money did his leadership campaign get from the communist dictatorship in Beijing? He won't answer. It should be a very straightforward answer, right? If he ain't got nothing to hide, well, he obviously has something to hide, and that's why he's preventing a public inquiry from going ahead. A Poilievre government, and in fact, a Poilievre-led opposition will continue the fight tooth and nail to get a public inquiry, because Canadians deserve to know what interference happened and to make sure it never happens again. The way he's stalling, you almost think he might want it to happen again. There's another election that could happen just around the corner. And if we haven't solved the problem before then, we'll obviously have more interference by Beijing to help Justin Trudeau get elected. If he really wanted a fair election, if he really wanted us to have Canadians choosing their own government, he would be taking immediate action to stop the interference. We have examples of Chinese Canadians terrified because of the intimidation of the communist government in Beijing. Carrie Lynn Finley can tell you stories of knocking on doors and having people tell her, put your phone down, let's go into the backyard and talk, because they're listening here in Canada. On our soil, Chinese-controlled police stations, 7 of them. Can you imagine if the FBI opened up police stations in Ottawa? We'd all be up in arms. Who do these Americans think they are? We'd all be saying. But when a communist dictatorship does it, it doesn't seem to bother Justin Trudeau at all. You know, you got to.
It's weird that it doesn't bother other people either. It's strange to me that other people, that citizens aren't putting more pressure on municipalities. We have people saying, you know, there's not enough rainbow crosswalks. But if there's a police station, from a Chinese police station in your community, nobody says anything. Is that happening, or is it just so full of Chinese diaspora that they're afraid to speak up? That might be true too. Munin says, out of curiosity, I took a peek at the campaign donations for Han Dong. Notice how many massive donations came from people just under the $1,650 Canadian max. This is definitely suspicious. I hope that CSIS investigates all of them thoroughly. And so this is a list of max donations to Han Dong. And a lot of them are Chinese names, and that's very interesting, don't you think? So what happens next? Is anything going to happen next with this? If Justin Trudeau gets his way, it'll be exactly like the Rouleau Commission. So no, nothing will happen with this. CTV News says, quote, nothing that anyone has reported shows election results impacted by Chinese interference. Does giving 11 candidates a share of $200,000 impact the election? Does it slant the election for the candidate that receives the money? The idea that just because this guy has not seen something that says the Chinese changed X number of votes and that's more than the number of margin of victory. That's not a slam dunk. Even finding that's not a slam dunk, but it's unlikely to find that because the way the cheating is happening is before the voting happens. They're removing conservative voters by saying, we're voting for this party. If you don't want to vote for Liberals, stay home. Or you better go vote for the Liberal rather than voting for the conservative that you want to vote for, or we'll do X, Y, Z. We'll threaten your family. We'll do these things, right? Pretty wild. Here is the same thing happening in the this is CTV News. This is just a little bit more on that U.S. ambassador saying, nothing I've seen, nothing anyone's reported shows election results impacted by Chinese interference. The U.S. ambassador to Canada says the questions of whether or not foreign election interference is happening is less important than whether it's been successful, and he hasn't seen any proof that alleged interference attempts by China in Canada's election have managed to affect the results. Here's a list of people who are donating to Handong, who most of them have Chinese names, and they're donating the max amount of donation. So that's interesting. That's impacting the elections, I think. David Cohen told CTV's Question Period host Vasi Kapoulis in an interview airing Sunday, his many years of political experience have led to his developing a certain level of skepticism and thick skin and an assumption that both China and Russia have been interfering in the elections of several countries for years. What horse poop. What nonsense. I almost think it's not even worth asking the question about whether there's interference, he said. I think the better question is, what is the interference targeting? Has it had any impact? Has it had any effect? How much money were the 11 candidates in Toronto given? Each riding or each person got however much it was. Has it had any effect? Yeah, they got more money than their competitors from a Chinese dictatorship. Potentially they're compromised by China. It has an effect. Of course it has an effect. In what world would that not have an effect? Quote, I've seen nothing that anyone's reported or that anyone's said that's been able to disclose any impact from any alleged interference by the Chinese in the last couple of Canadian elections, he said. I don't think he's being honest, to be honest. Sam Cooper says, in Ottawa, intelligence agencies reportedly found in 2017 that the CCP was interfering at all tiers of the Canadian political system. In contrast with Australia, however, Canada's political leaders did not act, and the problem of CCP interference continues to grow. So that was in 2017. There were reports prepared for Ottawa in 2017 that told Trudeau of these things, and he did nothing, nothing at all. So Rebel News reports, according to a recent poll, BC Auditor General Michael Pickup detected fraud in 61% of the province's government organizations last year. So this is a Rebel News report talking about fraud in government organizations. That's not good, right? It's not a good thing. The most common incidents include theft of physical assets, 43%, misappropriation of company funds, and information theft, regulatory or compliance breaches, and internal financial fraud. Published on March 7th, the Auditor General's staff surveyed 23 organizations representing 86% of government assets for the fraud, risk, and financial statements, BC Police Sector Part 1 report. So I just think that that's interesting, the depth of fraud we've got, and not necessarily Chinese fraud. I'm not necessarily saying it's Chinese fraud, but if you've got physical assets being stolen, et cetera, at that higher rate, like nearly 50%, 43%, that's concerning. And what's being stolen? Is it anything to do with national security? Could it have to do with national security? It seems like a way to dilute what's potentially lost or stolen or appropriated, right? It seems like they do the same thing with information. If there's an event that they see new keywords are being created by the event, Danforth shooter or something to that effect, they'll generate articles quickly to fill up the Google search with the approved narrative, right? And so it's kind of the same thing. They flood the market with all of these articles in order to satisfy the search demand, but also to take control of the narrative. I guess it's not exactly like that. It actually works more like a VPN server where there's so many people, the volume of people, you just disappear into the crowd, right? And so the volume here could just disappear, right? What is actually the target could just disappear. Anyway, here's CNN talking about China's interference and funneling of money to the Biden family, which is interesting. Here we go.
certain level of, just as a layperson, you hear this and it doesn't sound good. There's a guy whose name is John Robinson Walker. He gets $3 million from a Chinese-based company and proceeds to wire it out to a bunch of people named Biden, one of whom is Hunter Biden. Another one is a company that belongs to the president's brother, James Biden, and another amount of money to Beau Biden's widow, Hallie. So again, from a layperson, that doesn't look good, is it?
Right? Doesn't look good. Why are the Chinese funding the Bidens as well as all of this election interference in Canada? Pretty wild. Here's CBC reporting. This is from yesterday. U.S. ran secret probe into China's operations in Canada. The book alleges long-standing U.S. concerns. Canada intel veteran who recalls probe to testify in Parliament. So basically, the United States ran a secret probe into national security threats posed by Chinese overseas operations that drew alarming conclusions about Canada, alleges a new book co-authored by a former RCMP and military intelligence official. The book says the project, codenamed Operation Dragonlord, led to an unnerving takeaway that Beijing's activities in Canada represented a security threat to the United States. I wonder why we weren't invited to the sub thing. I think possibly there's a reasoning behind it, right? It has to do with our uncomfortably close relationship with China. Pierre Poilievre says, what is truly horrific partisanship is Trudeau covering up the election help he got from Beijing. It's so interesting that he can't say China. And then appointing a family friend and member of the Beijing-funded Trudeau Foundation to rapporteur about it. Yep, very interesting. Here is National Post. They say China's endgame, what Beijing hopes to gain by meddling in Canadian politics. Experts say China has clear goals in mind, from muting criticism to undermining Canada's relations with the U.S. and accessing trade secrets. Well, I mean, they've got full check marks across the board if that was the goal, right? As opposition, I'm not going to get into this article, but if that's their goal, if their goal was to gain access and to sour the relationship between Canada and the United States, well done. And Trudeau's done a great job of doing that. Biden's done a good job of playing into the role as well of souring the relationship between Canada and the United States. Believe it or not, Trump was more friendly. This is a history of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, published in 1979 in the Canadian Intelligence Service, Volume 29, Number 5. And it says... It claims, and I don't know if this is true, but it says that in 1950, that Trudeau Sr., Pierre Elliott Trudeau, was in Shanghai when the communists took over and became a rabid admirer of Mao Tse-tung. I'm saying that terribly wrong, I'm sorry. And then he came back and started recruiting, basically. Very interesting stuff. Very interesting read if you're interested in the potential communist history of, and this was accused in the 70s of Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Pretty wild stuff, right? Judy says, since nearly all of the Chinese media outlets in Canada are pro-China, why are traditional media outlets not translating their reports on interference? It would counterbalance the news perspectives accessible to groups who are being influenced. Yeah, that'd be an interesting thing, right? Are there major news articles that could be translated easily? I mean, could you use Google Translate to do that? I'm going to have to look at Project. I'm going to have to look into that. National Citizens Inquiry. I would need to know which papers are running and serving Toronto and Ontario, Canada area. And would they provide translation? Usually, like in Canada, on Canadian newspapers, you can choose the language you want. And sometimes in Vancouver, especially. But in BC, you could choose Mandarin or other Chinese options. So it's interesting. It's interesting that that's a suggestion. I wonder what level of accessibility and how easy it would be to translate using Google Translate or something to that effect. And if they provide already translations. Hello, everyone. Thanks for watching. You can check out full episodes of Canada Poly every day at CanadaPoly.com. You can also go to CanadaPoly.com and pick up a ticket for a live event. The live event is taking place in Streetsville, and the location will be provided to ticket holders. But you can check out a live event. Dr. Patrick Phillips, Sarah C., and Scarlett Martin. I'm sorry, Sarah. I don't know I can't say your last name, and I'm terrible at saying last names. We'll be joining Greg Wycliffe and myself for a an uncensored round table. It would be lovely if you could join us. Tickets at CanadaPoly.com. And if you live in Toronto, Mississauga, Milton, GTA, Hamilton, Guelph, Kitchener, Cambridge, it's probably well worth the drive to Streetsville. Thanks for watching, everybody, and have a wonderful, wonderful day.